they come charging out and they're running at me full bore. And like I said, I knew of a Sasquatch, but in my mind, that was a 8-foot tall creature, and there was only one of them, because that was the tales I was hearing. In my 14-year-old head, all I knew was this was not supposed to be here and it needed to die. And I had a 30-06 and I yanked it up, and I don't even think I aimed, but I hit one, maybe 2 shots. That part's a little fuzzy. And then there was the awfulest noise behind me. And I remember thinking in my head, they've got me surrounded.
I'd like to welcome Gene to Bigfoot Crossroads. Gene is the founder of the Kentucky Center for Bigfoot Research. How long have you had that organization going?
I started the organization officially in 2002. I had tried to find some scientific-minded people to join it back in the late 90s, probably 96, 97. But everybody I was running into was a little bit more gung-ho. They just wanted to run through the woods looking for something.
Right.
Every sound they heard was a Bigfoot, or it should have been a Bigfoot anyway. And they just weren't the guys I was looking for. There were one or two that was pretty good. And they actually both went on to start other Bigfoot organizations. Cause I was dragging my feet. I didn't want just a couple of guys out trying to do this. Cause I'm an anthropologist. I'm a practicing archaeologist. So, and I had got this degree based on my own Bigfoot encounter. So seeing it really changed my life. But anyway, I was looking for guys that were more like-minded. And toward the end of my academic career, I actually found people that secretly would tell me that they were very much into it. Because one of the things that several of our professors had told us, because I never made no bones about telling my story. I had a couple of people approach me about being in books, telling my story while I was in school, and they were like, don't do that. If you want a career, leave this alone. So secretly, I had other anthropologists, biologists, guys that were majoring in forest activities, whatever that may be, that were interested in being part of it. And that's when we actually officially kind of formed the group and actually started doing some field research.
So let's rewind for a bit. You mentioned that, your own experience kind of led you down this path and everything. Let's hear about that. How did this whole thing get started for you?
Well, my father was a long haul truck driver. And my first introduction to Bigfoot was he come home from a run one morning and was telling us about a guy that was following him across Jellicoe Mountain, which is the mountain that separates Kentucky and Tennessee on I-75. And they were heading north, I believe. And anyway, this guy got on the radio and said that a Bigfoot run behind Dad's truck, and was telling the people on the southbound side to watch that thing that was fixing to cross the road over there, not to hit it. And they got to riding him so bad that he eventually just turned off his radio. And him and my dad went on down the road, and this guy passed my dad going down the other side of the hill. and got off the interstate at a truck stop. Well, my dad followed him in to talk to him. And he said he got out and he was talking to the guy, said he was white as a ghost and kind of shaky in his hands and stuff. And Dad asked him, he said, "Are you sure it wasn't a bear?" And he said, "Damn it, man, I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina. I know what a bear looks like. And a bear doesn't cross the road in 2 steps or 3 steps." And so anyway, that was my first introduction into Bigfoot. And then Dad told me how natives called it sasquatch and so forth and so forth. So fast forward until I'm about 13, maybe 14 years old. I can't truly remember the date. It would have been 84 or 85. We were deer hunting in West Kentucky, Muhlenberg County, a place called Peabody Coal Company. Now, at that time, Peabody was about 62,000 acres of reclaimed mine land. And what it mostly was great big, long fields where they had strip mined the land, and then surrounding it was little what we called spoil banks, where they had dumped the tailings or the scrapings out. It was just hump after hump. And some of them were 30 feet tall, so it was just like little hill after little hill when you're just walking through them. But regardless, I was standing in this field, and it was about, I don't know, maybe 4:30, maybe 3:30. Sun was going down. We were hunting. I was looking, I believe, to the east. My father had went down a holler that was to the west. Now, this was a old growth holler that had never been mined. Big, large trees in it. You could see forever down it. But I'm standing in the field hunting, and I hear my dad shoot. And I've hunted with my dad my entire life, so I know what his gun sounds like. I know it was him. But the thing about it was he shot 3 times. And it wasn't the quick, rapid fire succession of "I'm in trouble," where you just fire off 3 very rapid shots.
Yeah. These
were deliberate and aimed shots. And what I found funny about that was my dad was always the kind that when he saw a deer and pulled the trigger, it was over with. The deer was down. But he shot 3 times, and I thought, well, maybe they were running or something. So I eased over to the edge of that field where I could look down the holler. Now, I had no idea how far down in the holler my dad went. It went for several miles down through there. And anyway, I'm standing there looking to see if there's going to be any deer come running my direction. So hopefully I can get a shot and maybe get a deer too. Because I'm under the assumption my dad has either totally missed or got a deer, one or the other. And I'm standing there and there's nothing moving down in the woods that I see. And then I start to hear voices talking. And I can't hear what they're saying. It's right on the edge of my hearing, but it's definitely 2 people having a conversation. And so I'm like, okay, there's somebody else down there. Dad's talking to them. I better go down and help. So I start walking down the holler, heading toward the bottom. Now, like I said, it was a big open holler. You could see forever except at the very bottom where there was I guess it would be a wet stream creek that whenever it was rainy season, the creek ran through there. And so it was real thick at that point, at the very bottom of the holler. And this holler was fairly steep. Not so steep that it was a trouble to walk, but it went straight down to a point and right straight back up the other side. And I get down in the holler probably 1,000 yards or so, because I'm not going straight to the bottom. I'm just kind of working my way down the edge of the holler, descending as I go. And I'm not hearing anything running through the woods or nothing like that. But all at once, 2 animals bust out of the brush, running right straight at me. And they're probably, when I first see them, they're less than 100 yards away. but they're on all fours. And at first I thought it was a canine of some sort. And then I noticed as they got closer, they were actually what I know now as being knuckle walking, like a great ape would do. Their back legs appeared to be shorter. Their butt was lower than their shoulders, and it went down in the, like what would be the thigh bone, kind of went back up, and then the knee come back down. And they had 3.5-inch long brownish red hair on them. They had no snout, no ears that I could distinguish or anything. But that was what I was hearing talking, because right after they busted out of the brush and I guess seen me, they started jabbering back and forth to each other. It wasn't words. One of the Sierra sounds does sound a little bit more like it. I was asked that question before. Was it like on the Sierra sounds? But it was more of a ape type gibberish back and forth. But anyway, they come charging out and they're running at me full bore. And like I said, I knew of a sasquatch, but in my mind, that was a 8-foot tall creature, and there was only one of them, because that was the tales I was hearing, you know.
Yeah.
In my 14-year-old head, all I knew was this was not supposed to be here and it needed to die. And I had a 30-06 and I yanked it up, and I don't even think I aimed, but I hit one, maybe 2 shots. That part's a little fuzzy. And then there was the awfulest noise behind me. And I remember thinking in my head, they've got me surrounded. So I spun around to see what the noise was, and it was a squirrel going up a hickory tree, making all kinds of racket. So I almost had a heart attack over that, you know. And so anyway, I spun back around to defend myself from the danger that I knew was on its way. And in the length of time it took me just to spin around and identify the squirrel. And the reason the squirrel was so loud, it was only like 5 foot away from me on a tree trunk. And in the length of time it took me to do that and spin back around, these 2 creatures had crossed back through the little thicket creek area and was halfway up the other side of the holler.
Wow.
And I shot 1 or 2 more times. I'm pretty sure I shot 3 times. I just can't remember if I shot 2 before the squirrel or 2 after the squirrel, because it was kind of a blur. It all happened, you know, very rapidly.
Yeah.
Because these things were moving. But I didn't see them long enough to see a whole lot of detail. I've replayed it in my head a million times. I try to make sure not to fabricate something in my own mind as to what I saw. But like I said, 3.5 inches long reddish hair. They were knuckle walking. They were jabbering back and forth to each other. Or I'm assuming to each other. They could have been yelling for mom or dad that I didn't see. And that part still bothers me sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a large one that I did not see. And but anyway, come to find out, when I finally did find my father, because right after this happened, he can drag his own deer out. I was out of there.
Yeah.
I went back to the field where I could see, you know. And so, but anyway, when I did finally see him back at camp after dark that evening, he had saw the exact same thing, and that's what he was shooting at as well. He was probably 150 yards from him, but he didn't know what they were neither. There's plenty of coyotes down there. We've encountered coyotes, but these were monsters compared to a coyote. I would estimate them being 160 to 180 pounds. I've never seen a coyote that big. And they just weren't canines. If they were canines, they both had broke hindquarters and were walking very funny.
Yeah.
But we kind of operated under the delusion that it was some sort of weird wolf that we saw. Even though I think I always had in the back of my mind what they were. And I think, if truth be known, my dad did too. I know the other guys that we hunt with, they suggested that it could have been a primate of some sort. I don't think any of them used the word Bigfoot, but I think that was discussed a little bit. But that's what he shot at as well. And he got a longer look at them than I did, but not really a better look. He agreed that they did not have snouts like a canine. He saw no ears. They were not running when he saw them. They were just walking through the woods. And my dad's reasoning behind it was he thought that it was some strange invasive species animal, and the only way we had ever convinced the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife we saw it was to kill one. And then if that way he killed one, then there wouldn't be a breeding pair of them. But anyway, that's my big adolescent juvenile Sasquatch sighting. Like I said, it later drove me on to getting a degree in anthropology just so I could study primates a little bit. Of course, there's no real primate jobs in Kentucky, so I had to do archaeology, and even honestly, that's not even that great. Still have to have secondary gigs sometimes, but I'm a musician and do several other things too, so it all comes out in the end. But that's what led me to starting the center, and we've done a lot of research since then, a lot of field stuff, a lot of academic papers that we've wrote for our own resources, not try to have published or anything like that.
Right.
What's weird is when I would go out with my scientifically minded colleagues, it was very rare that we ever had anything at all happen. Occasionally we would hear what maybe sounded like a wood knock or some strange howl that we couldn't identify off in the distance. But it wasn't until my own son and about two of his buddies wanted to go squatching one night, and I took them, that we really had any activity on research outings. And I always thought that was funny that it took a group of adolescent boys to make something happen in the woods.
Yeah.
So we can get into that in a minute after I answer any questions you may have about the sighting. I don't want to get too far ahead.
Yeah, just a couple things I wanted to clarify. Whenever your dad saw them, were they on all fours or upright?
No, they were on all fours then as well.
It's also kind of interesting that whenever he saw them, it was the two together. And then whenever you saw them, it was the two together. It's so rare to hear about anybody seeing these things where there's more than one.
Yeah. Yeah, I've run across very few stories where there's been more than one. But this, like I said, this was a long running holler. I really don't know how far down the holler my dad was. He could have just been a couple of 100 yards from where I encountered them at.
Yeah.
It might have not been that they were traveling a great distance, but I'm satisfied that they were juvenile Sasquatches.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've heard some, I won't call them crazy theories, but let's just say some outlandish things where people have hypothesized that there's areas where Sasquatches drop off their children while they go forage or hunt or whatever they may need to do. This could have been one of those spots. We We started hunting there when I was 11, maybe 10. And we pretty much camped in the same spot for 20 years down there before we ever migrated to a different location on the coal company land. There was always kind of weird things that happened. Always you could hear coyote packs just about every night. But every now and then there would be a deeper, bigger howl that you could hear that would happen. Countless times be sitting in the woods and all at once you'd hear what sounded like was somebody banging two rocks together or somebody beating on a tree with a baseball bat, which back in those days, nobody knew anything about that type of stuff, you know?
Right.
And now we know it was rock clacking and tree knocks. You know, all the mysterious sounds we heard back in the 80s and the 90s they now have answers to. You know, if you're a believer in the subject. And I kind of hate to use the word believer, but I know most people do.
Man, that's something, you know, just recently, over just the past week. I mean, it's something that comes up constantly, obviously, but that's one that's so difficult for me to just navigate around and hold my tongue on things, you know, tiptoeing around, you know, well, it's just theory, it's just belief, it's just opinion, it's just conjecture. And well, all that's true. Like, man, how are we supposed to ever move forward and find any answers if we're afraid to go after them? And at some point you just kind of have to be like, okay, well, I believe this is true. And so if that's true, then this, and that's how you advance.
Right. The way I look at it, belief is for religion. I know Bigfoot exists, not only because of my own eyewitness account, but based on the evidence that we have found while conducting field research and other people have found. There's a lot of people whose research I give as much credit to as if I was the one that was standing there when it happened to.
Right.
There's other people out there in the field that they come on the show or whatever, and I just mute it because they're going to say something that I just can't get on board with. And you know, a couple of times I've been into discussions with people and they want me to get all woo on them. And I have nothing against woo. I don't discount people's, you know, accounts, what happened to them, but I'm not going to say that, hey, I saw a light one time in the woods and then 10 years later I saw a Bigfoot. They must be connected. I refuse to make that leap. I did have one weird thing happen to me while I was down there hunting. I was standing in a big field and this large buck deer run out. And I had 100% plans on shooting the deer. It busted out of the woods and it was only about maybe 150 yards. And it busted out of the woods and it come running right toward me. And I could tell it had its tongue hanging out of its mouth. It was, you know, how horses look frothy and sweaty. This deer looked like that. And I could hear something else coming through the woods behind it. And I was like, well, this is a pretty good deer. What would be making this deer run like that? And I thought, well, it's got to be a bigger buck. So I'm waiting on it. And so that deer just keeps coming. And it's about 30, 40 yards or something like that in front of me. And then I think I can hear whatever's coming up behind it breathing because I'm hearing this heavy breathing. Just all at once, the deer that I'm looking at in front of me is now behind me. And I never saw it run by me.
Huh.
And it's running down like a two-wheel track road on the side of this great big field. So it's not like it went anywhere. And it's almost like I hate to put it this way, but almost like my brain saw something in that 3 seconds it took that deer to travel that ground that it doesn't want me to know about. It's almost like, okay, we're just going to take that memory and move it.
Yeah, some missing time.
Yeah, I told that story once, and they, oh, that was, it mind speak, and I'm like, no, nobody, that didn't happen. But I did not see a Sasquatch during that encounter. I heard something running. I heard something breathing. I did not lay eyes on anything, so I cannot tie that event with anything remotely Sasquatch related. I guess I make people mad sometimes because I won't make that jump. If people see lights and 2 seconds later they see a Sasquatch walking through the woods, that's great. That's an incredible encounter. I'm glad you got to experience it. But I didn't experience it. So I'm not on board that train. He's a flesh and blood creature as far as I'm concerned.
Pretty much everything that we know to be true scientifically can be traced back to some point where we thought it was something supernatural or paranormal in human history, and it was just the lack of understanding at the time that caused it to be that way. And this could be the same thing, it could very well be a flesh and blood thing, or it could be a flesh and blood thing that has abilities that we don't understand yet, or it could be something that we just don't understand at all and we think we do.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Native Americans, it's in all their mythology, their folklore, and that just because it's part of a mythology or folklore, or they say it descended from the sky or anything like that, that doesn't mean that that's the honest to God's truth about it. That just means that that's how their oral history has portrayed it through hundreds of generations of it being passed on. Because until the invention of the alphabet and writing, everything was oral. And I'm sure you done it in schools. They put everybody in a circle and tell somebody something on one side, and by the time it gets back around, it's a totally different story. So things have to have a little bit of something to sustain them to hold it together.
I mean, we didn't know sitting in that circle that game was a life lesson of how things were going to be forever, though.
Ain't that the truth? That's exactly right. But, anyway, I kind of got off the subject a little bit there, I think, but I don't discount anybody with any supernatural aspect to their account. It's just I have not experienced that. So, until I do, I cannot switch camps from it being flesh and blood. So that's where I was going with all of it, I guess. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I really lead toward Gigantopithecus.
Now, you heard these things talking.
Yeah.
Would you describe that as words and a language, or would you describe it as just communicating with sounds?
I believe it was, boy, that's a good way to ask that question. It wasn't words, not words as we understand words. It did seem to have a cadence to it that would represent speech and communication. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about when I first heard it, where it was right on the edge of my hearing.
Yeah.
Now, when they busted out of the woods or out of the brush and saw me, then it was just a whole lot of almost just like chimpanzees that you would hear on TV squealing and making chattering noise.
Have you been back to this area over the years?
I have hunted all the way around it. I had never stepped foot back in that holler until about 3 years ago. And I had went out the ridge I had my son with me, and we had went out the ridge. I was trying to get him his first deer, and there was, as we were coming back out, I noticed that some other guys had moved in and were in a tree stand that I did not see as we went in. So I didn't want to wreck their hunt. And so I actually went down into that holler and we walked out that way. And that was really the first time I've been back in it, it's kind of weird because I wasn't overly freaked out about the whole situation. I mean, I didn't run from the woods screaming. I discharged my weapon because I felt I needed to, but I reloaded my gun and turned around and walked out of the holler, and I finished hunting the rest of the evening in that field. Like I said, about, maybe 1,000 yards away from where I'd just seen these things. So I wasn't overly scared or anything like that. I think I was a little bit too in shock maybe to be scared at that exact moment. I think maybe later it set in a little bit better.
Here we are, this happened in the mid 80s and it led you to get a college degree. And here we are in 2025 having a conversation about it. So I don't think anybody would question the impact it had on you.
Right.
I mean, everybody reacts differently. It's not a horror show for everyone. I certainly didn't react that way. And I think it helped a lot that, there wasn't any real threat observed. They pretty much hauled ass on you, and you had your father there to confirm everything that happened and to keep you calm anyways. So,
yeah, I mean, I surprised them as much as they surprised me, because they were either sitting in the brush and maybe saw me and run out to try to get away, but it would make more sense if they would have run the opposite direction. But like I said, I never heard nothing running through the woods.
Yeah.
And I've had people ask, well, did the woods go silent? Well, the woods were silent when I went in there. There was gunfire at the bottom, down the holler
yeah.
there. So things had gotten quiet anyway. Now, were crickets and birds chirping? I don't remember, but there was no animal activity. But I just happened to be in their way. It's not like they were coming for me. If they were coming for me, they could have got me. As fast as these two things were, they could have run over me by the time I chambered the second or third round into that gun.
Yeah.
But when I heard the other noise behind me and spun around to make sure something wasn't right there fixing to get me, then they adjusted where they were going and they took off the other direction. They didn't want to have anything to do with me, and I didn't want to have anything to do with them. I will admit that over the years, sometimes my imagination gets the best of me. Sometimes when we're in the woods, I just get uneasy feelings sometimes. Everybody talks about the mind speak thing. And I did have an incident one time. We had been to one location and just went to check out a secondary location, just kind of drive through it. And we had stopped. It was about 3 a.m, and it was just me, my son, and one of his friends. And we had got out, and I'd let them make a couple of calls. I was just uneasy from the minute we got out of the truck. It could have been just because it was a spooky night. It was foggy. It could have been just because we were so remote and there was absolutely nobody around. But I just had this kind of uneasy feeling, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And then this is kind of touchy here, but something in the back of my mind said, you need to leave. And so I said, okay. And we got in the truck and we left. Now, once again, there was no Sasquatch. We never heard the first sound that would have indicated there was a Sasquatch. Was it my overactive imagination? Was I tired? Could have been all the above. But something in the back of my head said, you need to leave. And so we left. Now, I've always had a pretty good gut instinct on situations that were questionable. That comes from being a musician and playing honky tonks all your life.
Right.
You know when things are not quite right. So, that's one of them woo things. But like I said, once again, there was no Sasquatch involved in the making of this story. So I can't contribute that to that.
It's interesting to me, though. I mean, you're certainly not the first person that I've heard say that, and you're not the first person that's grounded in logic and a belief that these are flesh and blood to admit that they've experienced something like that. It's interesting that it's always a warning.
Right. And really the only reason I brung it up is because when I was doing another one of these, I mentioned it, and I don't want to be accused of, oh, well, he said this on this show, but didn't say it on this show, so it didn't happen. So I'm just trying to cover all my bases, because, the last thing I want is for somebody to say that I'm making anything up or anything like that, because I have been very adamant with my sons and the guys that I do this with, that if it didn't happen, we don't say it did, because that's not helping anything. You'll not find the Kentucky Center of Bigfoot Research on any web page. We have a Facebook page. We don't post stories. We don't post findings, because in my mind, we haven't found anything that furthers the topic. How many pictures of footprint indentions in the ground can we put out there?
Right.
We've got recordings of howls. We've found footprints. We've done gifting things. We've had rocks thrown. We've had some strange stuff happen. But how many times does that story need to be told? You made reference to what does it take to prove it? It's going to take a body. Science has to have a specimen. Now, I've heard people that are anti-kill, and if you had, footprint evidence and DNA evidence and video evidence, well, yeah, I suppose if you filmed one walking through a field, got the track where it stepped and got hair off the fence where it crossed, and you video documented all this in, HD resolution, that might tip more hats our direction. But for mainstream science to ever fully be on board, there's going to have to be one on a slab that can be analyzed and answer some evolutional questions as to where this creature may have come from.
Well, I mean, you said it right there. All those things are evidence. They're not proof. That's the problem.
Right. Yeah. There's only one thing that's proof, and that's the body laying there. Yeah, I would probably put one down, but I would have to be bad close to the truck when I done it. And I would have to have backup, because I believe if you actually tried to physically harm an adult, that things would not go good if you could not get away quick, unless you killed it. And if you did kill it, that may make it worse.
Before we continue the conversation with Gene, I want to stop here for a minute to mention my friends over at Incogni.com. If you're a longtime listener of the podcast, you may have heard me mention Incogni before, and how they've helped me take back control of my personal data that was being sold all over the internet. Not only have they put a stop to 143 different data brokers from selling my personal information, they have made the entire process effortless on my part. With Incogni, you will see far less spam in your inbox and a lot less of those annoying robocalls or scam letters. They have literally done all the work for me, and they are still doing it. I checked just earlier today, and there were another 80 requests being processed. As more come along, they continue to monitor and send out notifications to remove my data off the market, and they will do the same for you. I know some of you have children that are constantly on their devices, and Maybe other loved ones like I do that aren't exactly internet savvy when it comes to protecting their personal information. Well, Incogni.com has a family and friends plan where you can help protect them as well. Not only does Incogni do all the work and heavy lifting, like a Bigfoot researcher, they track down the elusive creatures that have your personal information and remove it so they don't sell it to someone that might not be a friendly forest giant. And they do this all with a 30-day money-back guarantee. But seriously, take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code Bigfoot at the link in the description and get 60% off an annual plan. Now we'll get back to our conversation. You mentioned earlier that this location where you had your encounter is in western Kentucky.
Yeah, it's in Muhlenberg County. Peabody Coal Company is, I think it's spread out across 3 counties, but where we was in Muhlenberg County. If you check all the big report websites, the BFRO, places like that, you'll find about 10 different accounts that happen right around there. Highway 70 runs right through where we were at. Matter of fact, where I saw my 2, I counted one time, I think there were 6 reports that was within 3 miles of where I saw mine at. At the very bottom of this holler, it goes into what's known as the Pond River. And on the other side of the Pond River from where this happened at, there is a small boat dock that you access through Morton's Gap, White Plains area in Hopkinsville off the Penny Ryle Parkway. And it goes right to this area. So I know that there's been 3 or 4 that's happened on that side of the Pond River. And that's only because it's more populated on that side. It's easier to get to. To get to where I was, you're actually driving on coal company roads for about 3 miles, maybe a little longer before you get to where mine actually happened at. And when mine happened, we had a 4-wheeler involved to get to the actual field. So it's very remote. As to where the boat dock, you can drive a car right to the boat dock. And when I say boat dock, I don't mean a big, it's a nice big boat ramp and there's places to park your trucks and trailers. No, it's just a little 10, 12 foot wide concrete slab that runs into the creek where duck hunters launch their John boats from. It's nothing elaborate. There's no lights, no nothing like that.
Yeah.
The area is big on hunting, both deer, rabbits, and ducks, because that's in the flyaway zone for duck hunters as the migration pattern. So there's a lot of that goes on down there.
Is there a part of Kentucky that's more known for Bigfoot activity?
Yeah, I would say East Kentucky, the Appalachian region, because West Kentucky, we're far removed from the hills of Appalachia. All of our research now mostly focuses on East Kentucky. Matter of fact, we've got some of our best stuff outside of my sighting within 6 miles of where I live. I got the best sound recording we ever got standing in my backyard.
Oh, wow.
So I live in the middle of a 2,000 acre, give or take, game reserve. There's a little strand of about 8 houses right here on this road. And the game reserve actually surrounds all the way around us.
So you can do research right out your yard.
Yeah. And, when we got this, we didn't even, we weren't trying to do anything. Me and my son, we had a tree that we cut down, so we were burning the brush in the backyard. And we had a pretty good fire going for 2 or 3 hours. And it got almost dark. And he come on back inside because he had homework and stuff he needed to do. And I gathered up the stuff we had out in the yard some gas and things like that, and was carrying it back to the house when all at once there was the awfulest high-powered scream I've ever heard. And I envisioned it in my head. It's almost like a dome that I can see in my mind, this sound. And as soon as he let off, every dog that's in the area, of course, chimed in. And it took me a second or two to realize I was holding my phone in my hand and hit the voice recorder on it. So I got the tail end of it, and I sent it to Cliff Brackman and had him send it to the guy that was doing the audio project, the Bigfoot Vocals audio project.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he said, just listening to it, he said, I wanted to write it off as canine. And he said, of course, you've got a lot of canines in that. But he said, when I run it through the analyzer and looked at it on the oscilloscope and all the stuff, he said, there is a distinct signature at the end of the vocalization. Now, he did not tell me what it was. I guess that's kind of a secret right now. But he said that there was a distinct signature that on all the reports that he gives credit to being Sasquatches to have this signature. And he said it was present in my recording. And then about, I don't know, maybe a month later, we got another one doing the same thing. And so we've got two recordings from right here at the house. Another guy I know, he does some Bigfoot research, and there is an area close to me. It's called the Pinnacles. Ironically, it's a very popular hiking area. It goes to a top of a mountain where you can stand on the rocks right on the edge of the cliff and see for miles. So it's a very popular area. And he had done some research up in there because it's about 1,500 acres. This area is. It's owned by the Berea College. And he had got some sounds and things like that. So him and two of his friends went up there. And it actually took them longer to get to the top, I think, than what they gave it credit for. And anyway, they got escorted off the mountain by several of these creatures. I don't care to talk about it because they actually did a TV show on it. It was on These Woods Are Haunted.
Oh, okay.
And he told me that when they hit the pavement area, there's a big parking lot where people can park. There's a big forestry education building that the college uses there. So it's a nice facility. They have craft fairs and festivals where this is at. But he said when they got to the paved area, he said the one that was however many 100 yards behind them, he said when their feet hit the pavement, said that it yelled. And he said the show let on like there might have been one or two creatures. But he said there was at least 6 more of them that yelled all the way up to the top of the mountain when they made it to the parking lot. It was almost like the one let them know that they had run them off, and they were just relaying the message. I talked to him and played him my voice recording, and he said that it sounded exactly to him like one of the creatures that he had heard on the Pinnacles. Now, the reason I'm even saying any of this is because the location where we do a ton of field work at, because it's very easy to get to. It's only about 5 miles from my house. My house, the research location, and the Pinnacles form a triangle that are 5 miles on each side of the triangle. So it's kind of like a squatch triangle.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's why I was even bringing that up, because kind of give you an idea of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, the same general territory.
Yeah, exactly. And where we do a lot of our research at, I had a woman contact me through Facebook, through the organization's page, and said that they had been run out of the woods by something screaming and throwing rocks. And she told me where it was at. And I thought, oh, that's crazy. People are out there fishing all the time. They go fishing, they go hiking, kids go out there and park, go out there and party. It's an active area, you know. Once again, this is owned by the college. I couldn't tell you how many thousands of acres the college owns here, but they do nothing with it. It's just all wild and woolly. And it's a reservoir lake. Anyway, she told me that, and I thought, well, there ain't nothing out there. But I thanked her for her report and told her we'd look into it. Well, my son had turned 11, I believe he was, and him and a few of his buddies wanted to go squatching because they all loved finding Bigfoot and all the shows. So I thought, well, that would be a nice, safe place to take them, let them just have fun. It was in February. He had the boys over. It had rained for like 3 days, very hard, like it always does in February here. But that night, it was the first full moon in February. And it finally cleared up that evening, just as the sun was going down and quit raining. So I told them, I said, boys, let's go squatching. So I loaded them up in the truck. We went out there, drove down the side of the lake where the woman told me to. And we parked down at the end, one of the far sloughs. And I mean, we're on a paved road. That's how kind of popular this area is. The other side of the lake is all gravel, but this side of the lake happens to have a paved road on it. But we're sitting there. We got out of the truck and I said, okay, boys, I said, you all do what you think you need to do. Have fun. Just enjoy yourself. So they're making calls. They've got the knockers out and they're making wood knocks. They're doing weird things, like one of them's got a train whistle and he's blew it a couple of times. They're just having a blast, you know. They're geeking out totally. I'm standing there, and my son says, I'm going to do my famous 2 shorts and a long. And I said, okay. So he does this woo, 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 you know. And now, mind you, they're 11 and 10, so they've got them high, shrilly voices still. And this is kind of what I was leading up to when I was talking about how nothing ever happened until I brought the kids along. Anyway, he does that, and I'm standing there, and I'm looking out across this slough. Now the water is up because, like I said, it's poured for 3 days, so the water is up. It's about 200, 250 yards to the other side of this slough, and he does his call, and probably not 3 seconds later, I'm seeing this just a little bit littler than a basketball size rock come flying through the air from the other side of the lake of that slough, 250 yards, give or take, away from where I'm standing. And it lands not in the water, not 20 feet from where I'm standing.
Man.
And of course, you know, it startled me, freaked the boys out. Of course, then I immediately put them in the truck because I'm not quite sure what's happening at this point. But they look like the clampets, you know, they're all hanging out the windows. It done a lot of good to put them in the truck, you know. But anyway, they're doing that, and I'm looking around, and I've got one of our good flashlights, but it's a little misty, you know, where it's raining, it's cold, it's 40 degrees, it's February. I'm shining it around and I'm not seeing anything. But I hear what sounds like something enter the water, just like you would if you pushed a canoe
Yeah.
off the bank, and it started going down. It's not making waves. It's not making, any sort of wake, but it's making just little ripples, and you can kind of hear it. And I'm like, okay. And then I get to hearing this tapping sound, this clacking. It was almost like a kind of sound. And I can't find anything. I'm not seeing anything. So it does that for a few minutes, and it kind of slows down, and just eventually there's really nothing else going on. I haven't heard anything move, haven't seen anything. So I tell the guys, I said, okay, if you all had enough, and of course they've reached, maximum overdrive on this. They're good to go at this point. And we leave. So the next day I called, or I guess I messaged Bobo off of Finding Bigfoot, James Fay. And I told him what happened. And I said, have you ever experienced that before? And he said, yeah, I've had that happen a time or two. He said that was a large male and he was mad. And the clacking sound was him clicking his teeth together, just like a bear does when they get mad. That jaw popping sound.
Yeah.
Of the teeth banging together. That's what he implied that was. And he said, you were right to leave with the boys, because I was underpowered. I had a 9mm pistol with me, but that was for, dope head protection, not Sasquatch protection.
Right.
And so I was greatly underprepared. And of course, we didn't have none of the high tech stuff with us. The boys were just having fun. That's what we went out to do. So anyway, he said, you were right to leave, but go back. And I said, okay. So we went back at least once a month for the rest of that year. Never another thing happened while we were out there.
Huh.
Like I said, it was the first full moon of February. Now, in the course of that year, we met a lot of people out there that lived out there. And one woman told me that she hears them all the time in the winter on the ridge. She hears strange howls. And she called them Bigfoots. I never called them Bigfoots. She was the one that said that. But she said that there was a couple of caves up toward the top of the mountain that she thought he stayed in. That's what she said. So anyway, we didn't have anything of note happen the rest of that year. On the following February, it was the full moon once again. We went to another location in a county next to us where a friend of ours had a Class A sighting on. And it's about a 2-hour drive up there. So we went up there. We hung out until about 12 o'clock, something like that. And we come back down to go to our hot spot. We pulled up in the exact same spot. The exact same 4 guys got out of the truck. And of course, for driving 2 hours, the first thing we all had to do was use the bathroom. So that's what we were standing there doing. We hadn't made a sound other than pull up and get out of the truck. And we had another rock thrown at us. The exact same spot, 1 year to the lunar calendar date later, another rock gets thrown.
Wow.
And my son is the one, him and one of his other friends, they saw it. I did not see it. I was on the other side of the truck. But they saw it come through the air. And he said it was about the size of a good cantaloupe. And of course, they're all Bigfoot experts now at this point. They've got years worth of trying under their belts.
Yeah.
So anyway, I trust him what he said. So I have no reason to believe that it wasn't a rock that big. But there was nothing else happened after that point. And we stayed around for probably 45 minutes and nothing else happened. We like to joke around that he just saw us pull up and was saying, "Hey, I remember you guys."
Yeah.
But since then, about every, I'm going to be generous and say every 10 or so trips that we go out there, we have a little something Bigfootish happen. Wood knocks or a whistle. We had, one of the last times we were out there, I was leaning up against my truck. And of course, the boys are older now. They're 14, 15, 16 years old. They had walked about 75, 100 yards away from the truck because they're not scared anymore, not scared of the dark like they were. So anyway, I'm just leaning up against the truck, and they're down there, and they've done a wood knock or two. It sounds like somebody had just picked up a handful of fine gravel and just threw it onto my truck. There was no big rocks involved. You heard it hit the truck. Where we were parked at, there was no trees over top of the truck, so it wasn't acorns or seeds or anything like that falling on the truck. These were rocks, but it sounded like you just picked up a handful of small, fine gravel and just pitched toward my truck. I guess that was the latest incident that happened.
Have you ever gone to the other side of the slough?
Yeah. And actually, that incident where the handful of rocks was thrown, that was on the other side of the lake. We've had activity all the way around the lake. We've had big rocks thrown at us on both sides of the lake now. We've heard sounds on both sides of the lake. My son said he thought he saw something one afternoon while we were out there. Me and him had went out. I don't even remember what we went for, but we wanted to look at something before we went back on another field trip. And the college had come out and done something. And anyway, they had cut a little path up the bank. And he said, "I'm going to walk up here and see what they've done." I said, "Okay." And a few minutes later, I hear him running down the bank. And he said, "I don't know what it was, but I saw something brown move on the other side of that opening up there." And I was like, "Well, okay, I don't know what it was, but I'm glad you saw something." So we can't chalk that up. Well, we can't chalk any of it up as Bigfoot because we didn't see none of it.
Right.
But, the rocks were, possums aren't out in the woods throwing rocks. You can tell the sound of a beaver tail slap as opposed to a rock landing in the water. When a beaver smacks the water with his tail, it sounds just like you went out and smacked the surface of the pool.
Yeah.
It's just that solid smack. When those rocks come in, they hit the water and they went deep. I mean, it was blump. You heard that secondary blump.
Yeah. As
the water, it's pushed out of the way, bubbles back up. And then the splash went high and it rained down. That's not a beaver tail slap. And even if I had not seen the rock with my own eyes, I could write it off that it was not a beaver, just on the sound that the impact of the rock made on the water surface. We had one weird thing happened out there. We were out there. We had the recorder set up. We had the parabolic mic out. I think we're even running thermal camera. And we got to hearing a kitten meow, a baby, little tiny kitten, like it was hungry and it was trying to find its mama. And it'd sound like it was 60 or 70 yards out here on the left. And then a few minutes later, it'd be 20 yards over here on the right. And it was just all over, just a baby kitten crying. But for the sound it was making, for us to have heard it, it would have been a baby kitten at our feet.
Huh.
That's how loud the cry was. But we never saw a kitten. We never saw anything at all. Nothing was picked up on thermal imaging, but there's a baby kitten crying all over the little wooded area back there, and we never laid eyes on it. So that was kind of weird.
Have you ever done any snooping around at LBL?
Yeah. I've spent quite a few years hunting at LBL. As a matter of fact, the first deer I ever killed was in Zone 7 of LBL when I was 11.
And you weren't attacked by a dogman or anything?
Was not attacked by a dogman. But now I will be the first to admit that what I saw at Peabody, if they were not juvenile Sasquatches, that's the only other logical explanation of what they could have been. And I've heard about Dogman for 20 years, I guess. And I always just wrote it off of, these are people that saw a Bigfoot and there was something different about it, or they didn't get a good look at it, or their overactive imagination took them to a werewolf, But then when you start getting hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands, of eyewitness accounts that all say the same thing, you got to give it a little bit of credence. I mean, we're basing our Bigfoot research on the same thing. Well, we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of eyewitness accounts that all see the exact same thing. There's got to be something there. Okay, that's fine and dandy, but now you've got the same thing for something else. Are you not going to give it the same leeway and credit that you give your subject just because it's not your subject?
Right.
And that's another reason why I don't write off any of the woo stuff. I mean, we've had woo stuff happen, like I said, but there was no Sasquatch involved, so I can't link the two because that's muddying the waters.
Right.
And like I said, that's not something I want to do or be accused of.
But I think it's important that you're at least mentioning it and taking note of it and documenting that it did happen.
Oh yeah. I mean, we have notebooks full of stuff. The way we document time, we document weather conditions, lunar phases, obviously, just everything that we can think of to document, we do. Whenever we find a footprint, I let the archaeologist geek in me out. I'm talking about soil texture and the color, everything like that, just like I'm writing a technical report I'm fixing to turn into the state,
Hey, substrate matters.
Yeah, you can build your road, just don't cover up my big footprint I found, right?
Yeah, go around.
I've not done that. I have found stuff on archaeological projects before. One of the best footprints I ever found, I found on a ARC project. That had some wooey things happen too. That had a weird incident during a gifting experiment. It was what we call a phase 3 project. There's 3 phases to ARC projects. Phase 1 is when you walk 100 miles digging a hole every 20 meters. Phase 2 is when you found something and you go back and you just look a little bit closer. Phase 3 is when, hey, yeah, we found something. It's right here. Go delineate it and see how big it is, see what it actually is and what they were doing there. So phase 3s are the ones you see on them in TV, like when they're in Egypt and they're down in the pits and they got their trowels and their little brushes and they're doing stuff like that. That's a phase 3. We were working on a phase 3 in Wayne County, down below Cumberland River Dam that makes Cumberland Lake. And we had a bulldozer come in and scrape off the topsoil of this area we were working in. And I was just taking a little break and I was walking around the perimeter. And the first thing I noticed was 3 holes in the ground. And I thought, oh, that's strange. And I kind of looked at it a little bit closer. And then I noticed that off to the left of it, there was about a 15-inch impression. So I changed out of my archaeology hat and put on my Bigfoot hat and got to looking at it a little bit closer and figured out that it had toes in it. And so I'm down on my hands and knees, and I've got my tape measure out, and I'm documenting everything, getting it from all different angles and trying to get as much detail as I can, because I'm on an ARC project. I'm not packing around plaster of Paris to make a cast out of, you know. And so I'm getting up after I get done, and I go to raise up, and I realize that I'm raising up on my fingertips on my left hand. And it's making the same indention as those 3 holes that I'm making that originally attracted me to the spot.
Yeah.
And I reach over without moving my fingers and stick them right in the 3 holes that were there. Almost like I just pulled them out of one bowling ball and stuck them into the other. Of course, the holes were a lot bigger than my fingers, and they were a lot deeper. They were about 2 inches longer than my longest finger, according to my ruler I had with me, my meter stick. So, because I couldn't reach the bottom with my fingers, but I could obviously reach it with my tape measure. And so they were about 2 inches longer, and probably about, the holes was about as big as 2 of my fingers put together. But the only thing I can figure is, for some reason, a squatch may have been down on a knee for some reason. And when it went to raise up, it stuck its fingers in the mud, just like I did, and raised up.
And this was on the freshly scraped area?
Yeah, it was right on the end of it. It was right on the end of it. It was beside a pile of the topsoil that we had scraped up. So it was right where the bulldozer had stopped pushing it and put it all in one spot so it could be respread when we were done. It was right there. And there was, you know, on an archaeology project, when you got a bunch of people there, somebody's always playing music on their phone or something. Nobody can work quietly anymore, it seems like. So we'd be working, and it would occasionally sound like we heard voices in the woods, or that somebody was coming up to us. It wasn't, you know, all that strange to have visitors on an archaeology project. That one it would have been, because it was kind of remote.
Yeah.
But you could still drive to it. But if somebody was coming to see us, they would have drove. They wouldn't have walked. They would have known how to access it by the farm path that was there. But we would just hear things like that. And every now and then you'd hear what sounded like a big limb break or something. And so one day we were on lunch, and one of the people that was on the project with me had some oranges, and they were going bad. They had got soft, and she didn't want them, and she was going to throw them in the woods. And I said, no, let me have them. And of course they all knew that I was a Bigfoot guy. And I had 2 apples that I had took from the breakfast bar at the hotel that morning. And so I took, what was it? I took a stick, I put an orange on it, I put the apples, and then I put another orange on the other end. And I took it all and I put it in the fork of a tree about 7 foot high off the ground, just what I could reach up there. And we left it. Next day we come back, it's still right there. Nothing has touched it. The next day we come back, it was still in the tree, but I could tell something had monkeyed with it. So I pulled it down, and when I pulled it down, I realized that the two apples were gone. Something had taken one of the oranges off the end of that stick and pulled both apples off, and then put the orange back on and put it back in the V of that tree. And of course, my mind's working, why didn't they take the oranges, and which we all know that Sasquatches migrate, but I'm satisfied that there is, I know that there is also habituation situations where, Sasquatches stay in this one spot. This is where they live. There's plenty of food, cover, shelter, water, the three components you need. And I got to thinking, well, if this was a Kentucky native Sasquatch that hadn't really ever been anywhere else, so to speak, he didn't know what an orange was, but he knew what apples was because we have apple trees. We don't have orange trees in Kentucky.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can come up with. But that was what I thought. I thought, well, if he is a true Kentucky native Sasquatch, he's never encountered oranges in the wild.
I mean, if you ran across something you had never seen before, would you eat it?
No.
I've always told people that if they're going to try gifting or leaving food out or whatever, to try and use things that are native to the area that they're in.
Yeah. And I've talked to a lot of people that have success with gifting to some degree. I don't remember who told me this, but they told me that they'd put a big white feather in like a tree stump and come back a couple of days later and there was a dead mouse laying on the tree stump where the feather was. And the feather, of course, was gone. But they also told me to be sure to take the mouse with me, not to leave the Sasquatch's gift, that would be an insult. Yeah, I remember who told me that now, and this person was a little more on they're more human than they are animal side, and you should show them great respect, and I can agree with that. They're a primate. We're a primate. We've got 46 chromosomes. A chimpanzee has 48. Chances are a Sasquatch is probably right there in the neighborhood with us, knocking on the door. We share 99% DNA with a chimpanzee. Sasquatch is probably right there. But anyway, this person was more along them lines, and they were friends with another person who said that they had lived on the same family homestead for 50 years and had known Sasquatches their entire life. And I think they're both dead now. But I won't mention their names, but one of them, the one that had lived on the farm with them, she did tell me one thing back in the late 90s that turned out to be a scientific fact, I guess, in 2023. She had told me that the elder Bigfoot, the elder male that lived on the farm, she said his name was Fox. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah,
this
of
story?
course. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Then I don't have to try to just tell it without saying names. She told me that Fox would come to the door and ask for garlic. Now, granted, I was taking all this with a grain of salt, but like I said, I don't disregard anybody's tale. And she said that she figured out that they wanted garlic because it keeps flies off of them. That's all fine and dandy. Fast forward to 2023. A friend of mine has a farm supply company, and I'm helping him with some trade shows and stuff. And he is a dealer for a feed company, and their proprietary ingredient to their feed is garlic, because it keeps flies off horses and cattle. Now, you can take that for what it's worth, but this woman tells me this in the mid-90s, and then 25, 26 years later, it's a proprietary secret. Well, not a secret, but a proprietary function of this big feed company's feed, that they put garlic in their feed because it does the same thing she said the Bigfoot told her it did.
In fairness, in the late 80s, we had a dog that our veterinarian gave us garlic pills to give to the dog because it kept pests like fleas and flies and ticks off of them.
Right.
So that was coming from a veterinarian in the late 80s. So I'm not disputing what she said. I'm just saying that information was around at least in the late 80s.
Was around. Okay. Yeah. See, I was totally unaware of it until this feed company deal, because that was their big push that they had figured this out, which maybe, well, obviously they hadn't if your vet was telling you this in the 80s.
I mean, that's how a lot of things happen. It's known around the rural areas for a while before it makes its way to mainstream and somebody figures out a way to cash in on it. So, absolutely. And my whole point of that was talking about, when people tell you something that sounds outlandish, don't totally discredit it, because years later it may be proven as right. Yeah.
And that's where I was kind of going with that.
I got heavily involved in this back in like 1999 is kind of where I remember first signing on to the internet and looking into Bigfoot stuff. And back then, doing calls was laughed at. Them running around on all fours like you had experienced, even though people had reported it, laughed at. Them really existing outside of the Pacific Northwest. There was a few people who were like, well, maybe in Florida, you've got the skunk ape, but then Ohio maybe, but the rest of the United States, especially the southern region, no, there's no Bigfoot there. And now it's widely accepted, and Dogman, speaks for itself. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of aspects to this that you might want to just hold off on writing off immediately because they sound outlandish to you, because like you're saying, on down the road, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Or at least don't make that your base claim to fame of disregarding this,
right.
So to speak.
Right.
Yeah. Don't, I would never listen to another researcher and then go badmouth them anywhere in a public format.
Yeah.
Privately, I might go, he's crazier than Alcy, but I'm not going to stand, behind a podium or on stage or on a podcast or anything like that and disregard somebody, because just like you said, years down the road, it might come back and bite you in the butt. I really believe that if a lot of people would more openly share what they have truly found, and if we want to talk woo stuff, we need to bring in people that do paranormal investigations as well into the Bigfoot community, and get their input on it. And because there's there's many things with Bigfoot that happen repeatedly that have to mean something. I mean, the lights. People talk about lights all the time. Now, I've never experienced that, but there's been hundreds of people that have. So, you can't disregard that, but it's got to mean something.
Right.
Bigfoot's hanging around cemeteries. There's hundreds of people that have experienced that. So it's got to mean something. and maybe people that investigate on the paranormal side can shed some light on that. I had a professor at the University of Lincoln down in Tennessee one time tell me that he thought that Sasquatches were ghosts of relic hominins. And I thought, boy, that's a new one, because I had never heard that. And he said, well, think about it. He said, you get ghosts of Revolutionary soldiers, Native Americans. He said, ghosts that were from hundreds of years ago. Why couldn't there be ghosts of relic hominins? And I'm like, well, that's a pretty good theory. I guess that's as plausible as, any of some of these other things.
Yeah. And I mean, it explains a lot of the paranormal woo aspects to this. And, there's a chance that maybe some things are overlapping. Maybe it's not all just one thing.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, like I said to begin with, for me, I'm still, locked in the flesh and blood. I believe it's one of the Gigantopithecus relic hominins, or maybe Paranthropus might be a relic of that. Gigantopithecus is closer than any of the other ones, but it could be. I just believe that's where it's come from. It may not be a Gigantopithecus, but it could very well be a branch off of it. I kind of opened my mouth on another podcast, and I miscalled one of them by a wrong name, and that opened up a whole crap storm.
Yeah.
I actually, I kind of got caught off guard, because I didn't know we were going down that, so I hadn't brushed up on some of my names, and I called it a Gigantopithecus garii, which is an Australopithecus garii, not Gigano. And somebody made a comment, there's only one Gigantopithecus. Well, no, technically there was three. And the first one that got found was later relabeled as something else. So two of them were the exact same thing. And then they finally took that one and reclassified it as something entirely different. So yeah, we were all right. There was three, but there is really only one. So, it was kind of hard to explain. I had to make notes and go back on the podcast and do a correction, because I didn't want people to think I wasn't, what I said I was. And I'm not a primatologist. I'm not, I didn't specialize in that. I just took the cultural and the evolutionary classes that went along with it, because that went along with my interest in the subject.
Right.
What some 2-pound primate eats on the weekend is of no interest to me. Let's talk about the ones that weighed 1,000 pounds.
Yeah. Let's talk about the big ones.
Yeah. I don't care about a sapsucker in New Guinea somewhere. It means nothing to it.
Well, Gene, I appreciate you coming on here, man, and sharing some of your insight and stories. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, man.
Oh, no problem. You're very welcome. Like I said, I get windy sometimes, and I always feel like if something's worth talking about it, then you ought to talk about it. So
yeah, I agree.
But I appreciate you having me on. I had a blast.
If you've had your own encounter with Bigfoot or something else you can't explain and you'd like to share it on the show, send me an email at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. Check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. You can find links to social media, past episodes, merchandise, everything you need all in one place. And until next time, remember, there's something in the woods.